Hey everybody, welcome back to City Line Online. We're so thrilled that you are tuning in and watching this live feed. And we want to say no matter where you're tuning in from, no matter what city, no matter what state, no matter what county, we are honored to have you with us. And if it is your first time, maybe you stumbled across a feed, maybe a friend invited you to church online today, we want you to know that we are so thrilled that you are with us. We hope this is not your last time that you'll be with us. We want you to enjoy your time here at City Line Online. In fact, today we're going to dive back into part 3 of a series of conversations that we've been in that we're calling The Hustle. The Hustle. The Hustle is an important conversation for us because, we're talking about something that's so significant to us. We're talking about money. That's right. Before summer officially hits, before school is officially out, before you start making your plans towards the fall, before you start trying to figure out what's next for the second half of the year, we're going to lean in and we're going to talk about your finances. We're going to talk about your stuff. And I get it. See, the reason why we're talking about this is because it's on the minds of so many of us. In fact, we're taught from an early age that, you know what, you have to get all you can, you have to work hard, you have to amass all your money, you have to get all your possessions so that you can live your best life now, so that you can have everything that you ever want. You know, you have to reach a certain financial altitude so that you can actually live the life that you've always dreamed of. But here's what I'm asking and what we're talking through as we navigate this is, what if in the middle of all that, in the middle of your hustle, you're the one that's being hustled? Well, what if we've just kind of missed out on what it means to actually effectively manage our finances or to fully understand what we're supposed to do with our money? And I get it. No matter who you are, no matter where you're from, anytime you talk about money, it gets weird. It gets uncomfortable, right? You get a little protective about it. You don't want anybody speaking into or telling you or making suggestions about what you think you should do with something that you feel is yours. But the reason why we're leaning into this conversation is because Jesus talked about money a lot. Jesus often referenced money. Even in a world where people were wanting to know more about other things, Jesus, tell us more about faith, tell us more about heaven or this understanding of this afterlife. Jesus said, no, let's circle back on money. It's as Jesus knew there was something about money and possessions and stuff that directly affects the core of who we are, that it directly affects our heart. And so if Jesus cared to bring our attention to it, then we owe it to you as a church to be talking about it, to be navigating through what does it look like to approach our money, to approach our stuff God's way. In fact, as a church, we owe it to you to be talking about money because oftentimes we're pulled in a number of different directions. The kids need something. Your marriage is in need of something. Your house needs something. The car needs something. We're pulled in all kinds of different directions financially. And so it becomes really difficult to know, how do you manage your money wisely? How do you approach money in a God-honoring way while at the same time still trying to enjoy life? And here's what we're saying. We're not asking anything from you either. Well, we're not setting you up for the big ask at the end. You know, we're not going to say, hey, you know, now's your time to give, you know, hit the online donate button or anything like that. No. We're asking you just to simply lean into this. Our hope is to teach you some things about Jesus, to teach you some things about what Jesus said about your money and your stuff. Because the reality for you and I that we have to understand is Jesus, he doesn't want something from you. He wants something for you. Jesus absolutely wants something for you. Jesus doesn't mind that you have money. In fact, he's entrusted you with money. But here's what Jesus doesn't want. Jesus does not want money to have you. He doesn't want money to own you. So we're asking you to wrestle through, to think about the implications of what does this mean as you respond to God with what you have, as you respond to God with what you've been given. In fact, Paul talked about this in his letter to the church at Corinth. It's kind of our foundational scripture that we've been kind of navigating through. He says, but since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love that we have kindled in you, see to it that you also excel in this grace of giving, that you're growing in this grace of giving, that you're taking next steps in learning what it means to be better at giving, that you do so many things well. The church at Corinth, they had great faith. They had good teaching. They had incredible knowledge of the faith, right? They expressed love to one another. They were actually taking the next steps to actually serve the kingdom of God. And so Paul says, since you're excelling in all those things, how about we take it a next step and we begin to excel in the grace of giving? Why would he call attention to that? Because giving is the thing that we easily ignore. This grace of giving is the thing that's easily forgotten about. So if you feel like you've forgotten about it, here's what I'm asking you to do. Follow up with us. If you missed a week or two of this series, circle back to Cityline Online and lean in, right? I can't unpack the last 2 weeks, but I can begin to lean in further to what we want to talk about today. And that's this, that sometimes it feels like the thing that we constantly think about all the time is money. And in fact, the famous street prophet Snoop D-O-double-G, he said it the best, right? Where he said, I'm laid back with my mind on my money and my money on my mind, right? I mean, you might not be familiar with that. Some of you might be, some of you acting real holy right now, acting like, you never heard that song in your life. But here's the reality. No matter your view of money, we might not be laid back with our mind on our money and our money on our mind, but make no mistake about it, money is often on our mind. In fact, I would say seldom there's a day that goes by that we're not thinking in some way about finances, about resources, about money, about what's going to happen next. To which I have to ask us the question as we begin today. Do you ever think about how you think about your money? You ever stop to just kind of process it? Do you ever think about how you think about your money? In other words, when it comes to our money and stuff, there's several different ways that you and I can kind of categorize the way we think about money. Let's just try this for a second. I would say one of the ways that we do that is we could be spenders. Do I have any spenders watching today? Wherever you might be watching from, that's right. You can just click the like button, a couple hearts or whatever it is, right? Raise your hand. I'm the spender, right? We have spenders, and not only do we have spenders, but we have savers, right? Anybody a saver? You just know that that's who you are, right? Everybody's linked you to just saving money. You do well with saving money. How many of you would say, well, I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of a spender and a saver or saver, or I'm not sure what the difference is between the two. I mean, let's go about it this way. I mean, spenders, they tend to have little to no money in savings, right? You know what I mean? Like spenders, they're just living their best life now. They're having a blast, they're just kind of living it up, but a saver, they're just kind of built different, right? Savers, somebody tells them that you have the unspiritual gift of cheapness, and you take that as a compliment. You know what I'm saying? You're like, somebody refers to you as kind of being tight with your money, and that brings a smile to your face because you're like, yep, that's right. I tend to save. You know what I'm saying? I pay attention to what's going on in my life. In fact, you go as far as get a kick out of telling everybody that everything that you've ever purchased, you've never paid full price for it, right? Like you've always talked them down. You always got a deal. Why? Because, well, you're a saver. But spenders, on the other hand, spenders, they like to buy stuff, but when they buy stuff, their tendency is to hide their stuff. Right? Like, have you ever done that? Like you buy stuff and you're not ready to share it with your wife or your husband yet, right? Like you bought some stuff and you're still trying to think about how you go about telling them about what you bought, right? Because you didn't really talk about it. You just went and you just spent it because you're that person here's what spenders do. When something breaks, you just go get a new one. Right? You don't even think twice about it. You just go get a new one. There's nothing necessarily wrong with your phone or your car or your computer, but you're just a sucker for a good upgrade. You know what I'm saying? Like you just need it. You just know it's there. Likewise, spenders, you know what spenders do? It's fascinating. Spenders will go to Costco, right? Or they'll go to Sam's Club and they'll spend a couple $100s on food and miscellaneous items that you didn't know you needed until you got there to the store that day, right? You'll go home, you'll put it all away, and then here's what happened. You go to dinner that night. Like you go out to dinner that night because you still don't think you have enough food in the house, but not savers, right? Savers, again, they're just built differently. Savers, they don't hide their purchases. They hide their money. They stockpile their money. They put it away, right? They're not going to let anybody get it. They save it for a rainy day or for in case of emergency, I'll break glass because they don't want anybody to know what's going on in their money. And when something breaks, you know what the saver does? Something breaks, they don't run out and fix it because the saver says there is nothing that duct tape, a little super glue, and maybe some Windex can't fix, right? Like you're gonna YouTube the tutorial and you're gonna take care of it yourself. Right? And an upgrade, yeah. Savers don't go for upgrades unless, get this, unless they got a deal. Right? Unless they can ensure that it's actually a deal, then they'll go for it. But savers, you know what's crazy about savers? Savers don't like to eat out. Savers think that there's always plenty of food to eat at home, even if it's like bread and condiments. Like you have a bread, like a condiments sandwich, like bread with like ketchup and mustard. It's like the weirdest thing, but you know what? They always seem to have food. Now, here's what I know. No matter where you find yourself, no matter what your view is of money, no matter where you kind of think that you are, whether you're a spender or a saver, there's another category that we know about. We don't often talk about. We're aware of it. We wish we had more of it, but it's this. There's the rich, and then there's the not rich. Okay, there's those that we would view like, hey, that person is rich. In fact, let me ask you, do you know someone who's rich? Do you know someone that you consider like they're just a wealthy person, right? You know that about them, or maybe somebody that you've observed from a distance, and based on what they have, based on what they do with what they have, you just say, well, that person, they must be wealthy. Have you ever taken it a step further and say, hey, those rich people that I've seen, if I were to be rich like them, I would be better at being rich than they are at being rich? Meaning that you would do something different with the money. You would manage it in a different way. You would buy different things because you can't understand why they buy the things that they buy. So see, we know a lot about what it is to be rich. We also know what it's like to be not rich. We wouldn't consider ourselves necessarily poor because I'm not so sure that we actually have a clear understanding of what poor is, right? Like we live in a place that, we're just sold so much. We have so much that we're not sure what it's really like to have to go without. We just know that we're not rich, okay? That we know that there's others that are, but we're not. Now, it's fascinating when you talk about this idea of rich and not rich because, Paul actually talked about that as well. Paul, in fact, in mentoring a guy named Timothy being a young pastor in an area known as Ephesus, the city of Ephesus, which is modern day Turkey, he was trying to help him to understand something about the concept of rich. It's something that you and I really need to lean into and fully understand today. Now, Ephesus is an interesting place. It's a major port city. I mean, it's an important city, right? There's all kinds of money and trade that tends to be happening in Ephesus at this time. And so Paul leans in and begins to talk about how you think about your money. And this is what he says, right, in 1 Timothy 6. Understand this. He says in verse 17, he says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain." Now, I just want you to take that phrase in, okay? Because that's a big statement. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor put their hope in wealth, which is so, keyword, uncertain. He goes on, he says, "But to put their hope where? In God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment." That God gets a kick out of us enjoying life. That God wants us to live a really good life. That we would put our hope in God. He goes on, he says, "Command them," those who are rich, to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. Now, generous and willing to share. Two words that are like, I got thoughts, I got issues, all kinds of feelings about that. What does it look like to be generous? How do I feel about sharing my stuff? You know what I mean? About loaning it out, about letting somebody borrow it. I mean, but he says, those that are rich in this present world, here's what it looks like. Be rich in good deeds, be generous and willing to share. It's understanding that God has provided everything for your benefit. God, every good and perfect gift, including your paycheck, including your money and stuff, has come from God. It's a blessing from God. So he says, command those who are rich in this present world to be generous and willing to share. To which finally you step back and you say, okay, I can listen to this message now because Paul's talking about those who are rich. You know what I mean? Like Jack is talking about those who are rich in this present world, and we already covered that we know what richness looks like. We have an idea and a definition of what it means to be rich. And here's what we know. We're not that. Okay? We're not rich. But here's what I want to do. I want to push back today and I want to challenge you on something. And what I want to do is suggest that you don't feel rich. I understand that, but you are. You might not feel wealthy, but you're rich. Congratulations. Glad you tuned in online today. The reality is that you are rich, but here's the thing. You just don't know it. Why? Because you don't think about it. You don't assess it. You don't understand all that you have been giving. What I'm saying is that every single person watching, no matter where you're watching from, no matter what time of the day that you're watching from, and I know it's going to be hard to believe me when I say this, but listen, every single one of you are rich. You are wealthy. Here's the problem. The problem is we do not feel that we are wealthy because we constantly compare ourselves to other people who we think have more than we do. We constantly compare ourselves with someone who has a better house, a bigger car, you know what I'm saying, has a better job, they get paid more. No matter what, when we look at our life and we think of all we have and all that God has entrusted in our hands, the reality is we just do not think that we're rich because we can always look somewhere else and there's somebody who has more than we do. But if you take a look closer. You'll find that if you would begin to compare yourselves with not just the people that are closest to you or around you the most, but people around the world, you and I would have to acknowledge that we are rich. In fact, I would go as far as to say, and lean into this when I tell you this, you actually have more than what you need. Yeah. You have more than what you need. You and I, we don't just have enough. You and I, we have extra. You don't believe me? Let's just ask some questions. Let's just kind of process this a little bit. Have you ever paid someone else to make food for you? Yeah, like you went and had extra money to go get takeout, to pick something up on the way home. Life was busy. Things were out of control. The kids had to go to practice, homework, but I paid somebody else to make some food for me, right? I mean, think about something as crazy as this. Like, do you live indoors, right? Like, do you have the luxury, mind you, luxury to live indoors in comparison to the rest of the world? Some people don't have that luxury, right? Like a TV, right? Do you have a TV? Okay, cool. Everybody's got a TV. Do you have more than one TV? 2 TVs, 3 TVs? Is there a TV in every room? Which would say that we have extra. It doesn't just stop with your TV. What about your car? What about your phone, right? Like, what about all these things that we have that we don't recognize? We've been given so much, and the reality is it's extra. We go so far as to even do this. Does anybody, I don't know if you've done this, do you have a jar or maybe an ashtray, in one of your cars where it's filled to the top? I mean, it's filled to the brim with what? This thing that we call spare change. It's spare. It's like leftover change. It's extra change. We don't like it jiggling around in our pockets. You don't want it swirling around in your purse. So what do? You dump it in the jar, right? You put it in the ashtray. You save it for later or whenever. You don't really worry about it because, well, it's just spare change. It's just there. See, we have so much when you really think about it, but because we have so much, here's what happens. It makes it incredibly difficult to give. Because we don't recognize all that we have, because we don't see ourselves as having much, because we look and see if there's somebody else who always has more than us, then what happens is we have a difficult time giving ourselves. In fact, I would suggest there's 2 really big barriers that hinders us from being generous. It is this. It's worry and fear. The 2 biggest barriers to you and I being generous and willing to share, it's worry and fear. Now, 2 words that I think are most associated anytime you talk about money, anytime you talk about finances, is worry and fear. We worry, first of all, if we're going to have enough, if we're going to be able to make ends meet. Let me ask you the question as you're thinking about, will you have enough? Have you ever thought about how much more money you would need to stop worrying if you're going to have enough? Do you have a number in mind? If you make $50,000 a year, how much more money would you need right now to make sure that you would stop worrying? Chances are you would do, 1.5 times what you're currently making right now. But you know what's fascinating about that? You can talk to someone who is making 1.5 times more than what you're making right now, and guess what you'll find out? They too worry about having enough. So if I ask them, how much more would you need to make sure that you're not worrying? Guess what we know? It's always more than what we have now. In other words, we worry that we're not going to have enough, but at the end of the day, we never feel like we have enough. And then what if we do spend? If we spend, we somehow live in fear that if we spend what we have, then we may never get more. We never might have enough that we need, but we also might not get it back. We have to spend it on this, right? We live in fear of like all this stuff that I've saved. I've got to save it because, well, what if? What if I need the car breaks down? I mean, what if something changes in the kids' school program? I mean, what if we live in this constant freak out mode of like, well, I've got to be prepared for what if. Now, listen, I'm not coming at anybody who's got a good financial plan and trying to be prepared, and you got your emergency account. That's actually a really good thing. But are we living in constant fear, always feeling like that emergency account is never going to be enough because of all the what ifs? What I'm saying is that when worry and fear consume us, it drives us to do some really interesting things. When worry and fear consumes us, it causes us to actually act in very irrational ways, right? We begin to do things that actually are counterintuitive. And the worst is we actually begin to go against what we know to be true about God. What we know to be true about God and who God says that He is. In other words, we have this weird mindset that we take on. That our mind begins to play tricks on us if we don't think about how we think about our money. Now, if you're taking notes today, this is not in your notes.
I want to be very clear with this statement. I want to say it because I don't want you to miss it because I think it's so important. And it's this. Listen, the manner in which you intuitively think about, right, and act financially, the manner in which you intuitively think, feel, and act financially, it reveals something about who you are and whose you are. Now, again, I'm going to slow it way down because I don't want you to miss this. Listen, the manner in which you intuitively think, feel, and act financially, it reveals something about who you are as well as whose you are. Jesus follower, listen, if you've surrendered your life to Jesus, the way you act, think, and feel intuitively about your finances will reveal about who you are, what's going on in your life, and who you actually say you've surrendered to or what you've surrendered to. You don't have to look far. You don't have to look hard. You just have to be willing to lean in and look close. You have to begin to recognize the mindsets. Recognize the mindsets that we take on when worry and fear take us over. What is the mindset that I'm talking about? I'm talking about the scarcity mindset. That many of us, we live with the scarcity mindset feeling like, you know what? I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And because I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, I worry about it. Why do I worry about it? Because scarcity says that there will never be enough. I'll never have what I need. There will never be enough. It's just this mindset that takes us over, that turns in not just to a mindset, but into a cycle. And understand me, listen, the scarcity mindset happens long in our mind, long before it actually hits us in the bank account. Long before it hits our savings plan. Long before it hits us in the wallet. Why? Because again, scarcity is a cycle. I want to walk you through that cycle. We think that we're never going to have enough. And so what do? Well, we worry. We worry because, I don't know where the next thing's going to come. I don't know if what I have right now is going to be enough for us to make it or that it's all going to work out. And what worry does is worry causes us to act in very irrational ways. So instead of getting a better financial plan, here's what we do. We actually begin spending more. Worry drives us to spend more. And when worry drives us to spend more, we do some really crazy things with that worry. We begin to consume more than we can afford. We talked about that in week 1. If you make $50,000 a year, here's what happens. You usually spend right up close to that 50, right? Which means everything that comes in goes out. We have a term for this. It's called living paycheck to paycheck. Some of us feel like that right now, that it's just so tight. It's paycheck to paycheck. But here's what some of us do. Because we're worried that we're never going to have enough and we're worried that we're going to need more, we actually spend more than we can afford. We actually go into the future and try to get money that we think we're going to have then to spend it now, which drives us to the place that we talked about. It drives us to debt. Why? Because, we need it now and we just assume, I'll pay it later. I'll pay it later when I get a raise. I'll pay it later when I get the bonus. I'll pay it later when I get the stimulus check. Right? But what does the stimulus check do? The stimulus check just stimulates us to spend more, to consume more, not to actually save and do something wise with it, which drives us to limited capacity. And if we have limited capacity, then guess what happens? We just feel maxed out. This is where we get to that point where you say, Pastor Jack, I get it. I know I want to be generous towards God. I know I need to put God first. I know you talked about this give, save, live, and I want to, but on paper, right? On paper, it doesn't work out. Why? Well, because chances are I'm limited capacity means I'm maxed out. It doesn't pencil out right. There's no way I can do it. And so I'm worried that I'm going to have enough as it is. And so what happens? Well, we're worried that we're going to have enough. And what does that worry do? Well, it drives us back into the cycle and it's continuous over and over and over again. Now, I know some of you are like, this is crazy. You're making all this up. Listen, if you don't think the scarcity mindset is actually real, something that worry and fear drives us into, then here's what I'd invite you to do. Just rewind with me back to March and April of 2020. Rewind back with me to March and April of 2020. Do you remember what that experience was like? Do you remember when you first heard about the pandemic, you first heard about this coronavirus, this COVID-19 thing, and they told you that you should probably go grocery shopping? It's probably one of the only things you can actually do, but you did that and you showed up and the shelves were empty, the shelves were bare, you couldn't find what you needed. Let me ask you this. If you think the scarcity mindset isn't a real thing, let me ask you, back in April of 2020, how was your toilet paper supply? Yeah, talk about some really irrational ways of thinking, right? We took a respiratory virus and we made it about another part of our body. right? And we freaked out, and we actually broke the warehouse completely down and wiped everybody out. Literally, get that? Wiped everybody out of toilet paper. Okay, why? Because of worry and fear. Like we're not going to have enough. That this isn't going to happen. Why? Because listen, scarcity drives irrational fear, overwhelming worry. That, you know what, there's just simply not going to be enough to go around, which begs a deeper question when you look at how you view God. It begs the question of, will God provide? Will God take care of you? Do you believe that God is big enough, that God is enough? It's the scarcity mindset. It's not just a scarcity mindset, but there's also this mindset that drives many of us in our life, and it's the consumer mindset. The consumer mindset. It's also driven by fear and worry, okay? This consumer mindset. The consumer mindset has a different approach, though. It's not about, well, I have enough. It's the understanding that everything that comes to me, well, it's naturally for me. Everything that comes to me, it must be mine. I mean, I worked for it. I earned it. I put in the overtime. It was given to me. You know, whatever that is, it's just mine. So everything that comes to me, all my stuff, well, it must be for me. Again, we use words like, well, I earned it. Well, it belongs to me. We even tell ourselves, I deserve it. Or you know what? I owe this to myself. I've been good, you know what I'm saying? Or I have been working hard, so I'm going to, here, I love this word. I'm going to splurge, right? I'm going to splurge. I'm going to take this to the next level, and I'm going to consume more, which again, it's a consumer cycle. It's not just a mindset. It forces us into a cycle that looks a lot like the worry cycle of scarcity. Right? But this one has a lot more to do with comparison. I look around me and I think that everything is mine, that everything is for me, that everything is given to me. It must be for my benefit. It must be a gift to me. I'm supposed to use it all for me. And then I look around and I see how other people are spending what's theirs, how they're living, how my culture tells me that I'm supposed to live to actually have significance and meaning and worth and value. And so I look and I think, well, I got to spend. So as I spend more, here's what happens. Spending more, I realize it's never enough because there's always a new thing, a bigger thing, a greater thing. And if I'm comparing myself to other people, guess what? They're always getting a new thing, right? They're always upgrading. So I got to upgrade. And so I consume more than I can afford, right? And when I consume more than I afford, here's what happens in our consumer mindset. We get forced into debt. Right? We borrowed money to live up to a lifestyle that makes us feel like we're living the lap of luxury, that we're truly living life. Or that because we've worked so hard and we're so stressed out and so overwhelmed that trip after trip after trip is just going to make it all better, but somebody's got to pay for that. Well, we go into debt, right? Because we need it now and we'll just figure out how to pay for it later. And then when it comes to generosity, being willing to give and to share, we say, well, hold up, time out. I've already maxed out. I'm already at limited capacity. You know what I mean? I'm already overloaded and there's no way that I'm actually going to be able to get it. Doesn't pencil out on paper. And not to mention, well, I mean, it's mine to do what I want with it anyway, right? I mean, but I chose to consume it. But yet I'm driven back to this worry and fear thing that if it is all mine, then I got to be thinking about what I do with it next to keep up with what everybody else is doing. Do you see how the cycle works? See, consumption is this unchecked desire. Consumption is this FOMO, this fear of missing out on what you could have. Fear that I won't meet the standard that people have put in place for my life that says you have to do these things to be found as significant, to be viewed as valuable or worthwhile. And as the cycle continues, it gets worse and worse and worse because in our heart, we wish we could give more. We wish we could be generous towards God, but there's this tension. And the tension that we most often face is always driven by everything that we want, not by actually the things that we need. In fact, Jesus understood the way we think, and he wanted to expose the root of our thinking. Jesus says, here's what you have to understand when it comes to money and stuff, right? When it comes to your possessions and the things that you own, it's really not an issue of money. Think about it. He says the worry and fear that are driving this cycle, it's deeper than just a money issue. This is actually a heart issue. Why? Because when you look at things closely, whether it's the worry cycle of scarcity or whether it's the my cycle for consumption, here's what you have to understand. When it's all for me and everything I have to spend more so I can get more, really that's a self-control problem. It's about self-control. Pastor Troy talked about that last week. It's a fruit of the Spirit, right? Which this case is a non-active fruit, right? It's an absent fruit in our life. Well, what about this? When we go into debt, isn't that a contentment problem? Paul talked about that as well. How beautiful would it be to arrive at a place of contentment where we didn't feel like we had to keep up with everybody or we had enough. And because we have enough, we can be content with what we have until God chooses to bless us with more, right? Self-control, contentment, discipline, limited capacity being maxed out, choosing to continue to drive the cycle out of worry and fear. It's a discipline problem, which Jesus says overall, when you're looking at the way that we're viewing our money, the way that we're spending our money, he says really, it's a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual problem of the heart. And Jesus always got to the heart of the issue. He always addressed the issue. In fact, Luke chapter 12, Jesus has been teaching. And as Jesus is teaching, somebody shows up and they've got an inheritance issue. It's two brothers arguing over who's going to get their share of the inheritance, and they want Jesus to figure it out for them. And Jesus says, you know what? I don't know that I'm the person to be the arbitrator for your case. He says, but since you've brought this to my attention, I'm going to take this moment to teach about how you think about your money, to think deeper about what you do with what God has actually entrusted to you. Luke chapter 12, 15, Jesus says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, because life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Now, this would have been eye-opening for a lot of people that were listening, because they didn't expect Jesus to come out with this. I mean, you and I, when we're hearing Jesus kind of lean in, I mean, Jesus, he tends to get to the heart of the thing, but that thing that he identifies, it's the thing that you and I least expect. Sometimes it's the thing that you and I think we don't have an issue with, that we don't have a problem with. Oh, pastor, that's not me. You know, I'm not greedy. Like, we got a definition of what greed looks like. We got a picture mentally of what greed looks like, right? And we look at ourselves and we say, we're not greedy. But I love what Jesus says. He says, watch out, be on your guard, okay? Pay attention, okay? He's like, hey, listen up, everybody. He says, because you have to guard against all kinds of greed. There's not just one kind of greed. It's not just the one definition that you have in your mind. He says there's all kinds of greed, again, that attaches itself to your heart. And the reason why greed is so dangerous is Jesus begins to say it often goes undetected. That greed can take root in your heart and be there for years without you ever fully noticing it. You don't always see greed. Why don't we always see greed? Because greed likes to mask itself as something else. We even hear it in our language. We're not greedy. You know, I just work really hard for what I get, you know, so I believe it's mine, you know, or you know what, I'm not greedy. I'm just frugal. You know what I'm saying? I'm just really smart with my money. You know, I'm not greedy or a consumer by any means. I just really like to enjoy nice things. Right? Whatever your MO is, the reality is Jesus says you have to be on guard against all kinds of greed. You know what I find fascinating? It's not uncommon for people to want to come and talk to me about certain issues or struggles that are having in their life. Sometimes it's, you know, Sunday after service, or sometimes it's, you know, during the week, you know, in an office consultation. And they come to me and they're clear about what they feel their struggle is. You know, I mean, some struggles that we deal with, some issues of our heart, I mean, they're just blatant, right? Like we know if we have a lying problem, I mean, we just know what that is. But you know what's interesting to me? To this day, I've never had anybody come up to me and say, you know, Pastor, I've been thinking a lot about the way I'm living my life, and I'm taking an assessment of my stuff. And, you know, can I talk to you about, I really think I'm struggling with greed. I really think that, you know, I just got some really greedy tendencies. No, nobody ever does that, because nobody ever wants to see themselves as greedy people. But here's what we have to understand. Greed is so subtle. Greed kind of just sneaks in. And greed, because it sneaks in and masks itself, here's what greed does. People with greed rooted in their heart, right? They begin to think, I'm not so sure that God can or will provide. I'm not so sure that God is big enough to take care of me and my situation. But even more so, sometimes as people live in the fear that God is not going to be able to take care of me in the way that I actually, or in the style that I want God to take care of me. I see my life as I want my life to be. I see my life for what I want it to become. And here's what I want to do. I want to project that on God so that God will do that for me. And the reality is God says, well, what if I have something completely different for your life? Well, what if I have something actually better for your life and you don't even know it because you've been trying to force my hand so much and trying to make me do what you want me to do based on the subtleness of greed? Why is greed so powerful? And why is greed such a thing that Jesus would actually lean in on? Well, Jesus would want us to know that greed is this appetite for more, understand, that is never fully or finally satisfied. Which is why we worry. Which is why we live in fear. Which is why we get so stressed and why we get so overwhelmed. Because we have all this desire, this appetite that's continuing to push us in a number of different directions. And if we don't pause and bring those things before God and ask God to change our thinking, to renew our thinking, then guess what? We get caught up in the hustle. You and I have a tendency to get hustle. And the reality for you and I, we have to come to understand that more money does not guarantee more self-control, and more money does not guarantee more contentment, and more money does not guarantee more discipline. More money only causes us to lean to a tendency towards more worry, more fear, more stress and frustration, unless we allow Jesus to change our heart. Jesus, he began to lean in. He wanted to give an illustration on what this looks like in the lives of people. And so Jesus leans in, and in verse 16, he says something fascinating. He begins to tell them a parable. A parable, you'll remember, is a made-up story. Like it didn't actually happen. Jesus is using this made-up story to try to illustrate a point, to lead people towards a truth. He tells this parable. He says, a ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Now just think about that. You already have a rich man. I don't know if the man knows that he's rich. I don't know if he understands that he's rich. I don't know if you and I understand that we're rich, but there's a rich man and he already has this abundant harvest now. So now he's not only rich, but he's about to get richer. And Jesus goes on to say that he thought to himself, the man said, what shall I do? Because now I have no place to store my crops. Did you get that? Like the ground has produced a harvest for the man. He's already rich. He already has plenty. He already has more than enough, but now he's being blessed with even more, right? And so what is he going to do? He asked himself, what am I going to do with all this stuff? I have so much stuff. Now, isn't it true when you and I are thinking about all of our stuff and how much we have? Don't we go into a panic sometimes thinking, you know what? I just need a bigger thing to store it in. I wish I had more space. I mean, I got all this stuff. I wish I could do something with it because, I know what I need to do. I just need to build something bigger. I need to buy something bigger. It's the same thing that this man thought. He says in verse 18, then he says to himself, here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I'll store up my surplus grain. Some really interesting insight here, right? There's nothing wrong with the barns that he has. They're just packed out. There's nothing wrong with the barns that he has. They just can't store the surplus grain. They can't store the extra. But he's got a consumer mentality. He's either got a consumer mentality or a scarcity mentality. Either way, it's driven by, everything that is coming to me, it obviously must be for me. So here's what I'll do. I'll tear down the perfectly good barns, right, which makes a lot of sense, and I'll build an even bigger barn so that I can store everything that has been given to me. Now, I get it. At first glance, you're like, hey, what does this mean for us? I'm not a farmer. I don't have grain. I don't even have a barn, right? But just think about the way that you live your life. Again, just stop and pause. Don't separate yourself from the story, but look closer, right? Look closer. Let me ask, does anybody know anything about self-storage units? Right? It's fascinating. When I was researching this, I was thinking about all the ways that we kind of build bigger barns sometimes that we don't realize that we're doing it. Did you know that the self-storage industry, just in the United States alone, this is not around the world, just in the United States alone, and these statistics are from within the last year, $39.5 billion industry. There are 49,000 storage facilities. I'm talking about like actual places to store things, not the single units, but companies, organizations that have hundreds of storage units available to you with an average of 1.9 billion square feet of rentable space for you to put your surplus stuff, your extra stuff, to which you were like, okay. So I told you this message wasn't really for me because I don't have a self-storage. Okay, think about where you live. Do you have a garage? When's the last time that you got frustrated when you went out to your garage? One, because there's either too much stuff out there that you didn't know what to do with, or two, you had a hard time finding where you're going to place some extra stuff in the mix of all the other stuff that already exists in your garage, right? To which you say, okay, well, I live in an apartment. I don't have a garage. Okay, that's great. Do you have a closet? You're like, oh, for real? Are you going to go to my closet? I'm just saying, look at your closet. I mean, just look at it. I mean, it's one thing if it's organized. Most closets aren't. But isn't it true that no matter where we go, where we're going to choose to stay, the house that we're going to buy, isn't it true that beyond the kitchen, you know what we're looking for? We're looking for storage space, closet space. We feel like we need more space. Why? Well, because we have so much stuff. And if you don't have a closet, then let's just drill it down even farther. How about this? Do you have a drawer in your house that you have labeled junk drawer? That you've got extra stuff in the drawer. You're not even so sure that you need or are ever going to do anything with it, but it's there just in case. I mean, think about it. This story Jesus is talking about goes directly to our hearts. Understand, he goes on and he says this in verse 19. He says, the man continues to say to himself, you'll have plenty of grain. You've got so much stuff. Now you've got stuff for years to come. He says, so take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Just take life easy. Just eat, drink, and be merry. Everything's going to be good. Everything's going to be fine, right? It's kind of like he's talking about the American dream, isn't it? Like make as much money as you can right now to buy whatever you want right now, but also make enough money that you can retire and buy whatever you want later. And then if you're really good, make enough money to even help your kids out, right? And leave something to them as well. He says, I'm just going to take it easy now. Right? I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. I'm going to live, love, and laugh. You know, he who dies with the most toys wins, right? But Jesus says, well, what if you're playing the wrong game? What if life is not the game of Monopoly, right? Like where you're trying to amass so much stuff to earn significance. What if it's a lot more like Uno? You know what I'm saying? Where you're trying to get rid of all your cards. To consume more is a bad thing, that you're actually trying to give out what you have. And if you're not careful, if you're playing the wrong game, then guess what? You just end up sorry. You knew I was going there, didn't you? Yeah. Jesus says, what if you're playing the wrong game? How do we know? Because Jesus responds in a way that they did not think he would respond. Jesus says, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? He says, listen, all his life he's been working. He's been successful. He's actually rich and he's got surplus. He's got extra, but he thinks it's all for him. He's worried that he might never have enough, or he just assumes that everything that comes to him must be for him. And so he consumes it all. He hoards it all. He takes it all. But then suddenly Jesus says, you fool. Why? Because what happens when you no longer exist? What happens when you're fighting all your life just to get your stuff? The question Jesus asks is, who will get what you've prepared for yourself? Who's going to get all this stuff that you've worked so hard for? And the answer is somebody will, because you can't take it with you. It's not going where you're going. You're going to leave it all behind. And when you leave it all behind, right, either the bank's going to get it or your kids are going to get it, but not because you ordered your life around generosity. It's because you don't exist. And then what are they going to do when they get it? They're going to spend it. They're going to get rid of it, right? They're going to trash it. Who knows what will happen to it? Which Jesus leans in verse 21 and he says, but understand, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. He says, this is what life looks like. That you work so hard, you stress, you overwhelm, you're trying to get the bigger thing, the better thing, you're trying to do all stuff, and then suddenly you don't exist. And then what? What do you have to show for yourself? Jesus says it's sad when at the end of your life, the only thing that you have to show for yourself is yourself. He says that's the wrong game. He says, but this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves. But listen, key word, isn't rich towards God. Isn't rich towards God. See, Jesus gives us a definition of a greedy person. It's someone who stores up things for himself, but isn't rich towards God. Who has trouble with the idea of give, save, live. To be rich towards God, to place Jesus first. Being rich towards God is Jesus talk for generosity. For choosing to place Jesus first in your life. Choosing to place God in his rightful place. Being Lord of your life. Jesus says if we're going to embrace scarcity, if we're going to embrace this idea of consumption, that it's all for me, if we're going to save out of fear, if we're going to spend frivolously and not care, or if we're going to give sparingly, or if we're going to do this me first living with kind of leftover giving, he says, you need to understand you're getting hustled. You're missing out on so much more. There's so much more that you can be a part of. And Jesus is inviting us to so much more. Jesus is inviting us to allow him to provide for us. Jesus is inviting us to trust in him. See, culture tells us that if you accumulate more, then man, you're winning at the game of life. But Jesus says, hey, I'm calling your attention to the fact that that's a hustle. That's a hustle, and you're actually losing on life. Why? Because money hustles us by attempting to promise us what only God can provide for us. That's the hustle. Money wants to promise us what only God can provide for us. Well, what am I saying? We think if we can get enough money, then we'll finally be happy, we'll finally be secure, and we'll finally be significant. We'll finally have influence. We'll finally have power. We'll be known for something. Our money kind of gives us status. He says, if we just get more, this is what money says. Money says, if you pursue me, if you chase me, then I can make you happy. I can make you secure. I can make you significant. But money lies. Money lies. Because money tries to promise you what only God can provide for you. And Jesus knows this about you and your money, which is why he's trying to get your attention, to help you to understand that money can be a huge source of stress and tension in your lives. But the stress that you feel about your money is generally not a money issue. Here's what it is. It's a trust issue. It's a trust issue. Will we choose to trust in Jesus? Will we choose to fully surrender to Jesus? Will we choose to place our life in the hands of Jesus? Not just parts of our life, not just pieces of our life, but all of our life. And Jesus knows what you and I often forget. That the areas where you worry the most are often where you trust God the least. And so you know what Jesus does? Jesus invites us to do something so incredibly awesome. Then Jesus says to his disciples, after this parable, after helping people understand the significance of what's going on, Jesus says to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry. Do not worry about your life, what you'll eat, about your body, or what you'll wear. Don't worry about all these things that you're concerned if I'm going to have enough. Is this going to work out? Is this going to be the right thing? Whatever that is. He says, don't worry. Well, Jesus, that's easy to say, but I worry about a lot of things. To which Jesus says, yeah, but life is more than food, more than the body. It's more than clothes. Right? Like life is more than food and the body is more than clothes. Like all this temporary stuff. In other words, Jesus says, look around at all the stuff that you've amassed. That's all temporary stuff. Jesus says your heart has been stamped with eternity. It's not about the temporary. It's not about all the stuff that's gonna fade. It's not about all the stuff that a lot of it you're eventually going to throw away. He says life is so much more than that. And then he hits in on the most important piece. He says, and let me just ask, who by you worrying can add a single day to your life? Staying on this worry cycle, staying in the cycle of scarcity, choosing not to trust Jesus with your finances and being willing to give first, right? Save second, and then live on the rest. You not being able to say, I'm fully trusting Jesus with my life. I can trust Jesus with my eternity. I can trust him with my health, but I don't know if I can trust him with my money, and so you stay worrying about that. He says, what are you doing to your life? See, the great thing about Jesus is Jesus says, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus says, I've come to give you life and give you life abundant. He's a God of abundance. So his suggestion to us is, why worry? You do not need to worry. You can place your trust in him. What? Give, save, live. What is that? It's an exercise in trust. It's an exercise in trust. It's what Paul told Timothy. Don't put your hope in all these things that are going to fade. Don't put your hope in your worldly wealth, because your life is more than that. Your life is more than your riches. Your life is more than your stuff. So how do we be rich towards God? Now, next week, as we wrap up this series, I'm going to get really, really practical. But in our last few moments together, I want to give you 4 statements that I just want you to think through this week. I want you to think about. I want you to think through, right? I want you to pray about. Okay? Because I think this is so important. This is about changing our perspective on our money. It's about thinking about how we think about our money. And the only way to do this, let me tell you, is by surrendering to God. The only way to do this is by allowing Jesus to change the way you think. Like Paul said in Romans 12, changing the way that you think. And the first is this. Listen, life is more than money and stuff. This comes right out of Jesus' parable. I want you to think about this week. All that you try to amass, all that you try to go after. And I want you to remind yourself, life is more about money and stuff. The second piece is this. Money is not a gift to consume, but rather a tool to be used. Everything that comes to you is not for you. The money that God has given you has been entrusted to you. It's not just a gift to you. It's a tool to be used by you to partner with God, to continue to pursue the good news, to continue to push the gospel forward, to continue to come alongside the work that God has already started in the world around you, and He's invited you to partner with Him. He wants to do something incredible in this world through you. Through you. So understand, money is not just a gift to consume, but it's a tool to be used. Understand this, those who find it difficult to live open-handed often end up empty-handed. If you're having a hard time living open-handed before God, chances are you'll end up empty-handed. Why? Because you'll work so hard to try to control, to try to manipulate, to try to do all this stuff. You'll try to do things on your own. And without godly wisdom in your finances, guess what? We'll screw it up. We'll make mistakes. We'll end up in a place that we never intended to be. And so Jesus says, invite me in. Invite me in to live open-handed, to trust God first. Then also, if Jesus is the Lord of my life, which includes my money and my stuff, then here's what I got to remind myself this week. Then I can trust that there will always, always be enough. There will always be enough. Again, as you process this week, as you think through this week, I'm asking you to take some next steps and wrestling through what does this mean in your life? What do you do? How do you think about how you think about money? Would you remind yourself of these things? And will you choose to take a next step? By telling yourself this. Again, pray about this. I will not trust in temporary riches, but in Jesus who richly provides. I will not trust in my temporary riches, but I'm choosing to trust in Jesus who richly provides. Father, I thank you for today. I thank you that you love us, you care for us. God, I thank you, Lord, that you are with us as we wrestle through, God, the implications of what you're teaching us about our money and stuff. God, whether we're living in fear or in worry or feeling overwhelmed by everything that's going on in our life, God, and feeling like we're maxed out to the margins, God, I pray that you would shift our thinking. God, that we would choose to take a step of trust in you. God, that we would see you as provider, that we would see you and your love for us. Lord, we would see that you care for us and want good for us, and that we'd be willing to trust you with every area of our life. God, help us as we think through this week. God, as we process these statements and these phrases, God, I pray that we would arrive at the end of the day knowing that I will not put my trust in my temporary riches, but I will trust in Jesus who richly provides. Father, we thank you for what you're doing in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.